Hello my dear friends, how are you? My name is Ari Thurger and today's subject is Frigg and Freyja are the same goddess? Well, if you have seen my latest videos about Freyja and Frigg, you already know the answer to that question. But let's develop this subject a little bit. Alright, if you have been around this channel for the past 3 months, I have been telling you that Frigg and Freyja are the exact same goddess. I have talked about the reasons why Freyja's cult progressively was put aside with the advent of Christianity. And for those videos, just go into this upper corner, click on the icon and you will have the list of videos concerning that. Even so, I think it's important to summarize how important Christianity was in the development of the goddess Frigg before we really start this video. As you know, with Christianity, the heathen gods progressively changed and lost their power. They were syncretized with other similar cults, gained Christian traits, and became the expression of the Christian consciousness. Most gods were equated with Christian figures. This was a smart method orchestrated by the Church to easily convert the heathens to the new faith, by creating similarities between both religious realities. Thus, people easily adopted familiar concepts. The cult of Freyja was a major tool in the process of Christianization of Northern Europe. She was the most worshipped goddess of Scandinavia, and their cult involved both men and women in both domestic and public events. She was loved by all. Other gods were worshipped, but not with such tremendous proportions as the worshipping of Freyja. Her power in Norse societies had to diminish during the conversion, so her cult in many aspects was outlawed. And her traits that seemed of little relevance or were not a powerful threat to Christianity itself were kept in the figure of Frigg. Freyja was almost forgotten, but in some ways she survived in the domestic cults of Frigg. With Christianity, Frigg gained more relevance, while Freyja was being put aside. Frigg was Freyja, but with the conversion this goddess became a more domestic, a more restricted goddess. Frigg started to represent a shadow of her former glory when she was Freyja. But this goddess wasn't split in two during the conversion. Christianity helped a lot in completely developing a different goddess. The Catholic Church continued to develop this division and finally consolidated it. But the division of the same goddess in two started during the Viking Age. Now let's finally start this video. Frigg and Freyja. The similarities between the two are outstanding. We clearly see we are talking about the same goddess. However, there are differences, just a few, and so superficial that we come to the conclusion that those differences are the product of the Christian Church and not by hidden hands. I know what some of you might think. For centuries we have seen Frigg and Freyja as two distinct goddesses, and now we come to the conclusion it's the same goddess, and that shatters the worshipping of both goddesses a little bit. But don't be disheartened. It was very common in pagan times, gods having different aspects and people worshipping those aspects as if it were completely different deities. So in a way, you can still worship both Frigg and Freyja as two distinct aspects of the same goddess. To the Germanic tribes before they brought their cults into Scandinavia, they worshipped a divine pair, Freyja and Udanas, and during the migration period, roughly between 400 and 800 of the Common Era, this cult would spread into Scandinavian soil. Freyja and Udanas later evolved into, respectively, Freyja/Frigg and Odin. The migration period goddess who later became Freyja was the wife of the god who later became Odin. Udanas and Freyja were the representation of the powerful pair within the Germanic societies, the war-chief and his wife. The Germanic tribes were much more concerned with the art of war, because it was through it that power was conquered, new lands, increasing of property and wealth. Udanas was not the king of the gods yet, the All-Father as he would later become in Scandinavia. Udanas was the god of war ecstasy, not of war itself, but of the rage and mixed powerful emotions needed to be successful in combat. On the other hand, Freyja, his wife, was the representation of the chieftain's wife, who played an important role within the society. She also ruled alongside her husband, and through active magic she would see the outcome of any conflict or any other event through divination, and was able to reshape the outcome. The chieftain's wife was the sorceress of the tribe, what would later in Scandinavia be equated with the figure of the vulva, more or less, not quite. This entire cult around this pair of deities was brought to Scandinavia. Hudanas became Odin and Freyja became Freyja/Frigg. The cult of Odin spread during the 5th century, and by extension so did the cult of Freyja, which became a mixture between the Germanic goddess and the old Scandinavian goddess Mother Earth, concerned with fertility and prosperity. Let's take a look at the similarities between Freyja and Frigg. Both Freyja and Frigg are attested of not having been faithful to their husband. Freyja is accused by Loki of having slept with all the gods. Infidelity is clear because Freyja has a husband named Holdr. Well, this Holdr may or may not be the god Odin, to whom Freyja is also married in certain accounts. Holdr is virtually identical to the name Hodin. Holdr means ecstasy, inspiration, furor, precisely the deepest and oldest traits of Odin himself. And it is said that Holdr spent a lot of time away from home and that Freyja wept for his absence. Well, Odin in most accounts is wandering around the 9 worlds, and by this we can easily identify both Holdr and Odin as being the same deity. Both are absent, which then leads Freyja to be unfaithful. This is the relationship between Odin and Freyja, an absent husband and an unfaithful wife. Now, concerning Odin's relationship with Frigg, Odin was also absent in exile for a long time. We have accounts of Frigg having slept with a slave while Odin was away in the accounts of Saxo Grammaticus. And in Lokasenna and the Ynglinga saga, Odin was once exiled from Asgard, leaving his brothers Vili and Ve in command. They regularly slept with Frigg, and she later is accused of having slept with Odin's brothers. So the relationship between Odin and Freyja and Odin and Frigg is virtually the same, an absent husband and an unfaithful wife. But don't take this too hard. The infidelity of a woman was not that big of a problem in Scandinavian societies. This story of an absent god wandering far off and rarely at home, and his wife is unfaithful, is the reflection of what was happening in the Norse societies during the Viking Age. Men were often at war, far away raiding or trading as far as Russia and as south as Northern Africa. Women were practically abandoned, alone taking care of the children and their home, so it became normal that women should rightly find another husband and move on with their lives. Find comfort in another because their husbands might never return. These were not Christian societies yet, in which people would be bound to each other forever under the vows they took in the house of God and before a priest during the marriage, to the point that if the husband died, women had to be faithful forever and mourn him forever and take no other. Now, getting back to the subject, Frigg sleeping with Odin's brothers may be the representation of the custom of the queen being the legitimizing factor to land rule. Thus, by sleeping with her, a new king was made, a new power would take over the land. Hey, we are Odin's brothers, he's not around anymore, so we are next in line. We take his wife and the throne is ours. Or this entire account may be the representation of a far older custom of hospitality, which included sharing the Lord's wife's bed. Frigg is depicted as a vulva, the Norse sorceress practitioner of Seidr, a form of magic within the shamanic frame of Northern Europe. In Lokasenna, after Loki blames Frigg for her infidelity, Freyja warns him that Frigg knows the destiny of all beings, implying that she also has the power to alter them if she so chooses. And let's not forget that Frigg's weaving and spinning activities are an allusion to magical work. Frigg spins the clouds in her spinning wheel. She weaves and creates clouds. As I've said before, Seidr, a magical practice, is all about the concept of weaving and spinning. I will make a video about that, but for now, suffice it to say that the concept of Seidr and the art of weaving and spinning are implicit in the magical practice. Not just physically doing it, but metaphorically. Weaving the destiny, reweaving as a form of altering events. and the practice of Seder is to push and pull, create and alter, bending things to our power and will, as if it were pushing and pulling cords. Well, as I've said, just like Freyja, Frigg is depicted as a vulva, but this trait of weaving and spinning is closer to Frigg than to Freyja. This is the case of something different between the two deities, wholly due to Christianity. Freyja is Frigg, but when Christianity came along, every magical work linked to Freyja was outlawed. But weaving and spinning was a domestic activity, and I think the Church saw this as a mere innocent household activity, not a potential threat to Christianity. So Freyja's magical practices survived through Frigg, who became associated with the trade of weaving and spinning. But little did the Christians know that such an activity had loads of magical practical uses. And since we are talking about Seder, shape-shifting is also included as a shamanic practice within Norse shamanic practices. We have loads of Norse myths concerning shape-shifting, and it also appears in sagas. Guess who has a shape-shifting falcon cloak? Freyja. Freyja owns a falcon cloak, falcon plumes made of falcon feathers that she and the other gods use for shape-shifting into that bird. And Frigg also possesses her own set of falcon feathers that are used for the exact same purpose. In the myths, it's attributed to her a falcon dress for shape-shifting purposes. Frigg means beloved, linking her to love, desire and sexuality. But it's through love and sexuality that Freyja manifests herself. Those are her main traits aside from her connection to magic, which also includes love magic and love poetry. On the other hand, Freyja means lady, a title rather than a true name. During the Viking Age and also in medieval Iceland, aristocratic women were sometimes called Freyjur, the plural of Freyja. The title lady connects Freyja to aristocracy, to nobility, as I've said in the previous videos about Freyja. But it's Frigg who is the queen of Hotgard, primarily linked to nobility. One's name is identical to the other's attributes, simply because they are the same, two aspects of the same goddess. Freyja was the Proto-Germanic goddess who is the foremother of Freyja and Frigg. None of the other Germanic peoples seem to have spoken of Freyja as if she were two goddesses. Only the Norse sources speak of her as being two distinct goddesses. Everywhere else it was always the same deity. Why exactly the Norse portrayed the same goddess as two distinct goddesses in Old Norse literature? This is due to the changes within the Germanic societies. The introduction of different cults, syncretizing them with native cults, and also, as I have said, Hudenas and Freyja were the representation of a warlike society, of war chieftains, of small groups of warriors. But things changed during the Viking Age, precisely because most warriors became Vikings, a way of life, seafaring, raiding, pillaging, piracy, trading, much more turned to the sea and conquering new lands rather than internal disputes. The mythological structures that had accompanied the warrior culture and the way of life of a society lost much of its relevance during the Viking Age. Odin was no longer thought of as the leader or the war chieftain of the gods, nor Freyja and Frigg, his wife, seen as a sorceress or seer. The roles of these two deities were reinterpreted, rearranged for the new social and political reality of the Viking Age. Odin became the All-Father much due to the contact the Norse had with other religious realities during the Viking Age, including Christianity and Islam. Freyja was progressively put aside and became Frigg, much more associated with domestic cults, with the women who stood behind taking care of the household, the farm, the property, taking care of the children, the domestic industry, and representing their absent husbands in the assembly, the role of a queen when the king is away. Odin became the representation of the Vikings, the pirates, traders, seafarers, the activities of the Viking. The importance of the warrior culture alone started to diminish, because during the Viking Age, other social and political activities were required to thrive, especially trading, find new lands to settle and to farm. Being solely a warrior was no longer enough for a fast-growing society in the process of globalization. And Frigg also changed to accompany her husband's changes and the social changes, of course. She became the representation of the queen, taking care of everything, of the property, securing, protecting, and moving on with her life while the husband is away. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. All the links to my social media are down below at the description. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video and tack för idag.